All right, so I've created a weapon stats component, which basically looks like this. It has damage, recoil, fire rate, handling, reload. I'll be adding stats later, a few more. So let's start with the base stats of AK, you know. Let's see how it does. All right. So if you see on the top left corner, it's the damage. The damage is 30, right? All right. So now let's check the hip fire. So this is how the hip fire looks like. Now let's add some attachments and see how it functions. So these are the base stats, right? Let's add a suppressor first. The suppressor reduces the damage a bit because it reduces the velocity, and but it helps with the recoil because it balances it out a bit. So it helps with the recoil. Let's add a laser. Yeah, laser doesn't affect damage, but it does reduces the recoil significantly because in real life people don't get a cursor when shooting a gun, but through a laser they they actually get some kind of a cursor which helps with the recoil. It also helps with the handling. Handling is basically uh, depend on several factors like ADS, aim down speed, and all those things. So it's a combination of that. It also laser helps with that as well. Okay, let's deploy this and see how it goes. All right, so if you see, the damage is now 24 because of the suppressor, and this how yeah, I see the recoil is better now. Don't mind this line. This is a very bad experiment with motion matching. All right, so let's dive right into the implementation of it. So first of all, I'm using Ultimate FPS Kit version 1 with ALS, but I think it should pretty much work with everything. It's a plug and play component anyways. So first we need to go to the weapon base and add a new component called BPC weapon stats. So this is a new folder which I've created, weapon stats. This is the new component. So let's go through the basics of what it needs. So I've created a blueprint function library to help with the helper functions because this will not just be used in in real inside the in game, but it also will be used in widgets and stuff. So it's better to have this function library. Then I've created a interface to pass around the data basically. And these are the simple widgets of the progress bar widgets where I'm very bad at UI, so it's very basic right now. So first of all, we need to create a weapon stats structure, which is basically, managing all the stats of a weapon: damage, recoil, fire rate, ADS recoil, hip fire, ADS speed, blah blah blah. You get the point. And I've just created a stats max. There's basically nothing. There's like what is the maximum value of something. This is just to create a scalar version of it, because when you divide it by this, you get a scalar version, like you can show it in a progress bar, which is from 0 to 100 or something like that. So I've set some default values. Uh, yeah, that's it. And then there's a data table which I have created to manage all my weapons. I've just added AK-40, AK-74 for now, with all its damage, like damage 30, and has its range and whatnot. Yeah, so now let's get back to the weapon stats, right? So weapon stats component is added already, and here's the weapon base. So first of all, what we need to do on event begin play is we need to initialize the stats, which is inside the weapon stats component. So we first pass in the weapon and as well as the init stats function, which is inside the component. We set the weapon and then we update stats. So update stats function. Let's see what's going on here. So this is get base weapon stats, right? So this basically inside the blueprint function library. What it does is just fetches the weapon stats from the weapons, right? So DT weapons data table. That's all it does. That's all. And once we have fetched the weapon, we can set it weapon stats. And yeah, now comes the main part, which is we need to get all the attachments of the weapon, right? So for in this particular project, the weapons uh, attachments are currently stored in the weapon base, and if you scroll down, you will see inside variables. Let's see all the attachments. Where are the attachments? These are the attachments. And FP current parts is basically all the attachments of the weapon, right? So we first fetch it, we for loop through it, and then we fetch the attachment details from it. Now, how do we get that, right? So first we need to go to a attachment base, which is a BP attachment base. Like if you have any uh, a parent for all the attachments which you have, right? So there's the BP attachment base. So what we need to do here is go to the construction script, and we need to first set the attachment details, right? Like what all the functionalities for it, like how it should affect the stats and stuff. So for that, what we need to do is, we first need to create attachment details that is already present in my project. So I can show you. This is probably in blueprint customization, data and structs, right? So yeah, as attachment details, right? So this is already created. I've just added one more S weapon stats here, which is basically the stats multiplier and whether it can affect stats or not, because not all attachments affect the stats, right? So stats multiplier is basically the weapon stats type, which we have created before, which I showed you here. There's the weapon stats, right? So this is for the gun, but I will use the same structure as multiplier for attachment, like how do they affect the weapon, right? So that's pretty much it. So let's get back to the attachment base, right? So first what we need to do is fetch the DT attachments table, which we have all the attachments here. So let's see here, suppressor, right? So I've added a stats multiplier. I've reduced the damage 0 0.8, so which is a scale multiplier. So it's like 80% of the base value. So we're reducing the damage. We are reducing the range by 80%. We are reducing the ADS recoil by 80%, stuff like that. Then I've also added to canted laser. So it does not affect the damage, does not affect much of anything else apart from fire recoil. If you see it's 0 0.5, improves the ADS recoil as well, improves the cycle speed, improves the ADS speed because the laser, right? All right. Yeah. So the laser basically reduces the fire and stuff. Yeah. All right. So what we need to do is we need to loop through all the DT attachments. We loop through all the row names, right? And then we basically get each row out and compare it with the attachment class, right? So this is attachment base, but if you see every attachment has its own blueprint, right? So we need to compare it with attachment BP. Once you've got it, if the condition is true, then we set the attachment details to this particular attachment base blueprint, right? So now that this is done, this is basically setting the attachment details, right? So now we need to go back to the weapon stats where we actually, weapon stats component where we actually fetching the weapon. We were getting all the current parts, we were looping through them, and this is how we can fetch the attachment details because we set it on constructor, right? All right, so now we get the attachments and we need to check if it can affect stats. If it is true, we'll add it to the attachments. Once everything is the looping is complete, we can now get the weapon stats. We are passing the weapon stats, which is the base weapon stats, and we are also passing the attachment stats, right? So this is basically another blueprint function. Weapon stats is basically a function. So we can set the current function here as a local variable. We loop through all the attachments. Now it's pretty basic. If it can affect stats, then this is the weapon stats and this is the attachment, right? This is the attachment. Now we can multiply it because it's a multiplier, right? If you remember, so it's 1 into zero point 0.8, right? So it will be zero point 0.8. So this is how we multiply everything apart from, I think, weight. Weight we need to add because that won't make sense. So now we have got the new weapon stats. We set it and we return the new weapon stats. All right. So now that we have got the new weapon stats, now we need to set it and set those stats in the gun, right? In the weapon. So there's a set stats function. This is going to fetch the weapon and the stats, right? So these are the new updated stats. So you just set everything with, like, for example, recoil magnification, right? So this is what ADS recoil. So now you have got the new ADS recoil. It will be set to recoil magnification, hip fire, recoil curve multiplier, cycle sight speed, aiming speed, reload speed, weight, damage, right? Everything is set to the actual gun. So these are basically the stats with these are the settings of the weapon base, which has its own settings, right? Like all of this, like damage and everything. So that's pretty much it. It should work like this. This is pretty much it. Yeah.